What happens when a man who gave his community clean water for free becomes their biggest enemy? Marcus Webb had built something beautiful, a natural spring pond that neighbors traveled miles to enjoy. But when new HOA leadership arrived, they didn't see generosity. They saw a black man with something they wanted to control. The fines started small. Then they became crushing. They demanded he pay thousands for illegal water hoarding on his own property. They threatened liens, foreclosure, everything. But Marcus had one card left to play, and when he finally played it, the entire neighborhood would learn a lesson they'd never forget. What he did next wasn't revenge. It was justice. And the HOA never saw it coming.
Marcus Webb wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. At 62 years old, he'd spent the last 4 decades living quietly on 10 acres of pristine woodland property in Riverside County, land that had been in his family since his grandfather purchased it in 1957. Back then, a black man owning land like this was rare. His grandfather had worked 3 jobs to afford it, dreaming of a legacy. Marcus honored that dream by maintaining every inch with reverence. The crown jewel of his property was the spring. It bubbled up naturally from an underground aquifer, crystal clear water that had flowed for thousands of years. When Marcus first inherited the land in 1998, the spring was barely noticeable, just a muddy trickle. But Marcus saw potential. Over 15 years, he carefully constructed a natural dam using river stones and timber, creating a beautiful pond that stretched nearly half an acre. The water was so pure you could drink straight from it. He'd had it tested multiple times. 0 contaminants. Nature's perfection. He wore his uniform daily, denim overalls, a straw hat to shield his face from the sun, and work boots that had molded to his feet. Marcus was a man of the earth. He'd wake at dawn, walk the perimeter of his pond, check the dam's integrity, and spend hours maintaining the ecosystem he created. Dragonflies danced across the water's surface. Deer came to drink at dusk. It was his sanctuary. But it wasn't just his. That was Marcus's gift to the community. For years, he'd allowed neighbors to visit the pond. Families brought their kids to swim on hot summer days. Elderly couples sat on the benches he'd built, enjoying the peaceful sound of the small waterfall that fed the pond. Hikers would stop to refill their water bottles. Marcus never charged a dime. He'd greet everyone with a warm smile and a simple rule: respect the land, and the land will respect you. "This water doesn't belong to me," he'd often say. "It belongs to the earth. I'm just the caretaker." The neighborhood loved him for it. For nearly 2 decades, Marcus Webb was the quiet guardian of a community treasure. Children grew up swimming in his pond. Parents thanked him for providing a safe, natural space in an increasingly developed area. He received Christmas cards, homemade pies, and genuine gratitude. But then things changed. In early 2023, the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association expanded its boundaries. The county had redistricted, and suddenly Marcus's property, which had existed independently for decades, fell under HOA jurisdiction. He received a letter in March informing him of the change. At first, it seemed like a formality. The letter mentioned something about compliance reviews and community standards, but Marcus didn't think much of it. His property was grandfathered in. He wasn't part of their suburban development. He'd been here long before most of these houses existed. Then came the inspection. A man named Dale Crenshaw, the newly elected HOA president, showed up in May with a clipboard and an attitude. Dale was everything Marcus wasn't: loud, entitled, and dressed like he was heading to a corporate boardroom rather than walking through woodland. He barely introduced himself before he started pointing at things. "This pond," Dale said, tapping his pen against his clipboard, "is this permitted?" Marcus remained calm. It's a natural spring. Been here longer than both of us. But the dam, did you get approval for this structure? This is private property. Built it myself 20 years ago. Dale's eyes narrowed. He walked along the pond's edge, making notes. We've had complaints about traffic. People coming and going, parking on the street. This is a residential community, Mr. Webb, not a public park. Something in Dale's tone made Marcus's jaw tighten. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. There was a disdain there, a dismissiveness that Marcus had encountered too many times in his life to misinterpret. These people have been welcome here for years, Marcus said evenly. Never been a problem before. Dale looked up from his clipboard. Well, now it is. He handed Marcus a document. You'll be hearing from us. As Dale walked back to his expensive SUV, Marcus stood by the pond, holding the paper. The warm breeze that usually calmed him felt different now, heavy. The first warning sign of the storm ahead.
The document listed multiple infractions: unauthorized water collection and storage, unpermitted recreational facility, excessive visitor traffic, and non-compliance with community aesthetic standards. The fine? $500, due within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in additional penalties of $100 per day. Marcus read it 3 times. Water collection? He wasn't collecting anything. The spring had been flowing naturally for millennia. Recreational facility? It was a pond. And aesthetic standards? His property was pristine, more beautiful than any of the cookie-cutter houses in the HOA development. He called the HOA office the next morning. A bored-sounding administrator told him that all concerns needed to be submitted in writing and that Mr. Crenshaw would respond within 10 business days. Marcus wrote a detailed letter explaining the spring's history, his family's ownership, and the fact that his property predated the HOA's jurisdiction. The response came swiftly. Denied. The HOA claimed that because the pond was artificially enhanced with the dam structure, it constituted a man-made facility requiring permits and HOA approval. Furthermore, they argued that allowing public access created liability issues for the entire community. Public access? Marcus muttered to himself. I'm sharing my own property with my neighbors. But Dale Crenshaw wasn't interested in neighborly sharing. In June, he showed up again, this time with 2 other HOA board members, both white, both wearing expressions that matched Dale's bureaucratic coldness. Mr. Webb, we need to discuss compliance, Dale announced, standing at the edge of the pond with his arms crossed. Marcus stood in his overalls. Marcus felt his blood pressure rise. That would destroy the pond. The spring would just flood the area. Dale shrugged. Not our problem. We're giving you 60 days to come into compliance. Otherwise, the fines continue accumulating. One of the other board members, a woman named Patricia, spoke up. Her voice dripped with false sympathy. We're not trying to be unreasonable, Mr. Webb, but you have to understand, we have rules for a reason. If we let you maintain an unpermitted water feature, what's to stop everyone else from doing whatever they want? Marcus looked at her steadily. This isn't a water feature, like some backyard fountain. This is a natural spring my grandfather built his dreams around. Then get the permits, Dale interrupted, or dismantle it. Your choice. They left him standing there, the summer sun beating down, the sound of his waterfall suddenly feeling like a countdown timer. Marcus did his research. Getting the permits they demanded would cost thousands of dollars. Engineering reports, environmental assessments, legal fees. Even then, there was no guarantee the county would approve it retroactively. The system was designed to favor new construction, not grandfather-end decades-old structures built by a black man who'd done everything himself. He paid the first $500 fine, then the second. By August, he'd paid $1,200, draining his fixed retirement income. The HOA didn't care. They kept sending notices.
When neighbors asked why they couldn't visit the pond anymore, Marcus had to tell them the truth. The HOA was shutting it down. Word spread quickly. People were angry at the HOA, not at Marcus. Several neighbors attended HOA meetings to advocate for him. They spoke passionately about how Marcus's generosity had enriched their lives, how their children had learned to appreciate nature at his pond, and how the community had become closer because of his kindness. Dale Cranshaw sat through these testimonials with a stone face. When it was his turn to respond, he was blunt. This isn't about popularity, this is about rules and property values. An unpermitted structure is a liability. If someone drowns in that pond, guess who gets sued? All of us. Mr. Webb needs to comply with the law. But everyone in that room could feel what wasn't being said. There was something personal in Dale's crusade, something that had nothing to do with permits or liability. One neighbor, an older white woman named Helen, who'd known Marcus for 15 years, finally said what others were thinking. "Dale, why are you really doing this? Marcus has been nothing but generous. This feels targeted." Dale's face reddened. "Are you accusing me of something, Helen?" "I'm asking a question." The room went silent. Dale stood up, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I don't have to justify enforcing the rules." Next topic. By September, the fines had reached $3,700. Marcus received a letter threatening a lien on his property if he didn't pay immediately. They were going to take his land, the land his grandfather worked himself to exhaustion to buy, the land that represented his family's only real generational wealth. Marcus sat by the pond one evening, watching the sunset paint the water gold and orange. Tears blurred his vision. He was tired of fighting, tired of being treated like a criminal for sharing something beautiful, tired of a system that saw a black man with property and wanted to remind him that he didn't truly belong. He thought about his grandfather, thought about the stories of discrimination the old man had endured, thought about how many times black families had built something only to have it stolen, burned, or regulated out of existence. "Not this time," Marcus whispered to himself. He'd spent weeks researching his options, and he'd discovered something interesting. The dam he'd built wasn't just holding back spring water, it was preventing the natural flow from flooding the lower properties. Several homes in the HOA development sat at a lower elevation. Without his dam, the spring would follow its original path, and that path ran directly through the neighborhood's streets and yards. Marcus had engineered the dam to protect them as much as to create the pond, and they had no idea. He called a lawyer, a young black attorney named Simone Harris, who specialized in property rights. She listened to his story, reviewed his documents, and smiled. "Marcus, they just handed you all the power. You don't need their permission to remove your own structure. And if they're claiming it's illegal, then removing it is exactly what they're asking you to do. But the water will go exactly where nature intended. And since they've established that your dam is unpermitted, they can't force you to maintain it. You'd actually be complying with their demands." Marcus felt something stir in his chest. Not anger. Something more powerful. Justice.
October 15th. The morning arrived cool and clear. Marcus woke before dawn, but this time he didn't walk the perimeter of his pond. Instead, he stood at the dam with tools in hand, his heart pounding with an emotion that was equal parts grief and determination. He'd sent the HOA one final letter 3 days earlier. It was short and precise. "Per your repeated demands that I remove the unpermitted structure on my property, I will be dismantling the dam on October 15th. This will return the spring to its natural flow pattern. I have complied with your orders." He'd copied 3 neighbors, his lawyer, and the county records office. Now, as the sun broke over the horizon, Marcus began the work. Each stone he removed felt like a piece of his heart,
He'd placed these rocks with his own hands 20 years ago. He'd envisioned children playing here. He'd dreamed of legacy. But sometimes, he realized, legacy isn't about what you build. It's about what you refuse to let them take without consequence. The dam was engineered well, too well. As Marcus systematically removed the key support stones, the structure held longer than he expected. Water began trickling through the gaps, then flowing, then surging. By 9 a.m., the dam gave way completely. The sound was like thunder. Thousands of gallons of crystal-clear spring water released from its containment roared down the hillside, following the path of least resistance, the same path it had flowed for thousands of years before Marcus's grandfather ever bought this land. That path led directly into Riverside Meadows HOA development. Marcus stood on the top of his property, watching the water go. He felt no satisfaction, no revenge, just a profound sadness that it had come to this. Within 20 minutes, his phone started ringing. He didn't answer. The water followed the ancient creek bed, which had been paved over and developed into Sycamore Lane, one of the HOA's main streets. The spring's natural flow was powerful, fed by an underground aquifer that never ran dry. Water rushed down the street, turning it into a river. It flooded yards, pooled in driveways, and began seeping into crawl spaces and foundations. By 10 a.m., the HOA emergency line was overwhelmed with calls. Residents were panicking. The water wasn't stopping, it just kept coming, a relentless flow that had been artificially redirected for 2 decades and was now reclaiming its original territory. Dale Crenshaw's house sat at the lowest point in the development. His manicured lawn became a swamp within an hour. Water surrounded his foundation, then found its way into his basement. His expensive home theater system, his wine collection, his pristine storage area, all flooding with ice-cold spring water. He called Marcus, his voice shaking with rage. "What did you do?" Marcus answered this time. His voice was calm, measured. "I removed the unpermitted structure, like you demanded." You can't just, you're flooding the entire neighborhood." "The spring is flowing where it naturally flows, Dale. I was controlling it. You told me to stop controlling it, so I did. Fix this. Put the dam back." Marcus let the silence hang for a moment. When he spoke, there was steel in his voice. "You called my dam illegal. You fined me thousands of dollars. You threatened to take my property, my family's property. You treated my generosity like it was criminal, and now you want me to rebuild what you demanded I destroy? We'll sue you for damages." "Sue me?" Marcus actually laughed, though there was no joy in it. "Sue me for complying with your orders? Sue me for returning nature to its natural state on my own property? My lawyer would love that, and I think the news would love it even more. HOA forces Black Landowner to remove a dam, then sues when natural spring floods development. Yeah, Dale, please sue me." He could hear Dale's breathing on the other end of the line, heavy and furious. "You can't prove this was intentional," he finally sputtered. "I don't have to prove anything," Marcus replied. "You gave me written orders to remove an illegal structure. I have every email, every fine, every threat you made. I complied with the HOA's demands. The fact that you never bothered to understand what that dam was actually doing? That's not my problem. That's yours." Marcus hung up. He stood on his property, looking at where his beautiful pond had been. Now it was just a muddy crater with a stream running through it. The waterfall was gone. The peaceful sanctuary was gone. 20 years of careful stewardship erased in hours. But he'd made his point. Sometimes the only way to make people understand what you were giving them is to take it away.
The flooding lasted 3 days.
The spring, fed by an underground aquifer, continued flowing at approximately 100 gallons per minute, roughly 144,000 gallons per day, pouring into the Riverside Meadows development. The county eventually had to bring in emergency crews to dig diversion channels and install temporary pumps, costing tens of thousands of dollars. 17 homes suffered water damage. Dale Crenshaw's basement required complete remediation, $40,000 worth of repairs. The HOA's insurance company launched an investigation, and when they discovered the paper trail of demands and threats against Marcus Webb, they refused to cover the damages, citing self-inflicted harm through inadequate due diligence. The HOA tried to force Marcus to rebuild the dam. His lawyer, Simone Harris, shut that down immediately with a simple response. My client is not obligated to maintain a structure you classified as illegal. If the HOA wants a dam built, they are welcome to seek permits and construct one on their own property. Mr. Webb's land is private and will remain in its natural state. The county eventually had to get involved. Engineers studied the situation and confirmed what Marcus had known all along. The spring had been flowing through that valley for thousands of years. The housing development had been built directly in its floodplain, ignoring the natural hydrology. Marcus's grandfather, with wisdom born from working the land, had built at the high ground. The dam Marcus constructed had actually been protecting the downstream properties for 2 decades without anyone realizing it. The county mandated that the HOA fund and construct proper drainage infrastructure to handle the spring's natural flow. The cost? $380,000, split among the HOA members through a special assessment. Each household received a bill for $2,400. Dale Crenshaw was recalled as HOA president in a special emergency election. The vote was nearly unanimous. But the most powerful moment came 3 weeks later. Marcus was served with one final document, not from the HOA, but from a group of neighbors who'd formed a coalition. It was a formal, written apology, signed by 63 residents. They acknowledged how Marcus's generosity had been repaid with suspicion and hostility. They admitted they hadn't stood up for him strongly enough when Dale's targeting became obvious. They thanked him for the years of kindness he'd shown their families. And they asked, respectfully, humbly, if he would ever consider rebuilding the pond. Marcus sat on his porch reading that letter for a long time. Helen, the older woman who'd first questioned Dale at the meeting, came to visit him personally. You had every right to do what you did, and I'm ashamed we let it get that far. You shouldn't have had to prove your worth by taking away your gift. We should have protected you. Marcus nodded slowly. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the fines. It was that they looked at what I'd built and could only see something to control. Not generosity. Not community. They saw a black man with something they wanted to regulate. Helen's eyes filled with tears. I know, and I'm sorry. We're all sorry. The story made regional news, then national news. The narrative was impossible to ignore. A black landowner, harassed by an HOA for sharing his property freely, forced to reclaim his rights by demonstrating nature's power. Journalists interviewed Marcus, and he spoke with dignity about generational land ownership, about the constant pressure black families face when they acquire property in predominantly white communities, about the invisible labor black people perform to make spaces accessible to everyone, labor that's often punished rather than appreciated. Dale Crenshaw refused interviews, though reporters discovered he'd been involved in 3 previous HOA disputes targeting minority homeowners. The pattern was damning. As for Marcus, he faced a choice. He had the community support now. The HOA had backed off completely. He could rebuild the dam, restore the pond, return things to how they were. But standing at the muddy crater where his sanctuary had been, Marcus realized something. The pond had been beautiful, but it had also been a target, a vulnerability. something others felt entitled to control. Maybe, he told Simone Harris one afternoon, maybe the lesson isn't about rebuilding what was. Maybe it's about teaching people what they lose when they choose control over community. He never rebuilt the dam. The spring continues to flow naturally, managed now by county-funded drainage systems that protect the downstream properties. Marcus's land remains pristine woodland. Neighbors occasionally ask to visit, and he welcomes them, not to a pond, but to walk trails through the forest, to listen to the spring's natural music as it runs free. Some ask if he regrets what he did. Marcus always shakes his head. I don't regret standing up for myself. I regret that I had to. There's a difference.